we focus on a university passage. This year, as you also remember, we're focusing on the Deuteronomy portion and the Mark 12 portion of what we call the Shema, or the hear the command of God. And I'm always happy to have someone with us to talk about this. Today it's really great to have David Dufault Hunter, who's our Vice President for Enrollment Management. And David, thanks for taking time to take a few minutes to talk with me, to talk with everyone about this passage. Glad you could be here. So, as you think about the university passage in Deuteronomy and in Mark, taken together, what's a perspective that you have on that as you think about how that informs your work, or how your work informs an understanding of that passage?
It's an interesting exercise for me to go through those passages that are familiar, and to reflect on the idea or the command, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. And that idea of love God, which is a simple statement, but how is that actually lived out? When I start to think about it, it's not an easy question to answer. Now, you know, in Deuteronomy, it's talking about you're following the decrees of God, but God, we're following those decrees not because God needs to be appeased, but because God wants to be loved. So it changes the directionality of that command from how does this, I need to appease God, so I'm going to do what I need to do to appease God, as opposed to, no, God is asking me to change the direction of my focus from myself to God. Now that's a abstract thought, which is why Mark helps to say, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Now that gives me a way of loving God, a way of understanding how I am to love God. I would say that as it relates to enrollment, part of our purpose for being is to serve the students that we're either inviting to consider our community, or it's to serve those students that are here. Now, one of the interesting things for me is the Matthew version is a little bit different, right, of this same command, in that someone asks a really important question, which is when Jesus says, "Love your neighbor as yourself," and someone asks, "Well, who is my neighbor?" And that's always my question, even though I may not completely own up to it. I want to know who I'm supposed to love. And Jesus' response in that is so crucial because he changes it, right? Not from who is my neighbor, but you be a neighbor, which means that I can't define who I extend God's love to. I instead have to be a neighbor. In other words, I have to treat you in the same way that I treat myself. I have to protect your interests in the same way that I protect my interests. That's a high bar.
So you're referring to that phrase, love your neighbor as yourself.
Right.
That's what you're getting at, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
So if I'm to love my neighbor as myself, then that means that the interest that I have in protecting my own life and being concerned with my own needs, I extend that to you. And more importantly, I don't get to decide who I do that for, right? I don't get to decide who I do that for. And so I think as it relates to undergraduate admissions and enrollment, it means that I don't get to decide how I serve you as a student or prospective student. I'm obligated, I have a moral obligation because of this command to treat you and to protect your interests as I would protect my own. And I think how that works out most of the time is just in engaging in conversation with people, and people that may be coming from a different perspective, or they may be angry, they may be frustrated, there may be all sorts of things that contribute to their particular that particular moment in which they're engaging with an undergraduate enrollment person. But our perspective is, so how do I engage you as a person who's being a neighbor to you, as opposed to, I need you to be a particular kind of person that will then determine how I'm going to engage you.
Right. So as you think about this in terms of the overall mission of the university, how does this university passage really press us forward in being a Christian community of disciples and scholars advancing the work of God in the world? I mean, that's the first half of our mission, right? And so how does this passage maybe shape that or inform or compel us in fulfilling that kind of mission?
That's a really good question. We have a great opportunity as a university to live out the mission that you've just described in a way that could make a significant impact even in the city of Azusa. You know, there's all sorts of voices right now in our world that that demand a polarization of ideas.
Yeah.
Right? Where you're talking about what's happened in Paris. You're talking about what's happening in our political life, that there is no one who's able, or even who appears to want to bridge a gap. And the reason we're doing that is, in part, in my opinion, is that we are asking the question that the scribe asked: who is my neighbor? Because I want to know who I don't have to extend God's love to. I want to know who I don't have to extend that sense of your needs. I have to protect your needs as much as I have to protect mine. And when we don't ask that question, then it's easy to move into a polarization. And I can say, not only do I disagree with you, but you don't matter as a person. Yeah. And so I think part of our obligation as a university is to be able to say, we're going to prepare and are preparing students to engage in a different kind of dialogue that is established by recognizing that I need to be a neighbor to you, and therefore I have to figure out how to listen to you, how to recognize that your perspective, while I may completely disagree with it, I still have an obligation to you to be connected to you in some way. And I know that's not an easy thing, but that is our mission as a Christian institution. And so, how do we do that in the city of Azusa, where you've got students that are coming out of high schools that are not as academically prepared as students that have come in the past? How do we access that optimism that comes from our understanding we serve a God who brings life out of death? Meaning, and what that means then is, even if you come academically unprepared, we believe that your academic potential is not rooted in where you are now, but is rooted in a God who brings life out of death. And so we can appropriate our skills, our abilities, our talents in terms of educating students, understanding your gifts now, and helping you develop into a person that God's called you to be. Yeah. That's all predicated on I am attending to your needs as I attend to my own.
Yeah, so this is really a very complex but very simple at the same time message to the community, right?
And it's one that's really difficult. I mean, in the end, we're all broken.
Yes.
We're all broken, and we're not going to be able to extend that sort of love to one another consistently. Yeah. And so it's where it's why we then depend on forgiveness, on that, not only the forgiveness that we experience through God's promise to forgive and God's redemption, but also how we extend that forgiveness to one another. That while we step on each other, while we hurt one another, while we do the things that always happen as we fumble through life, that we recognize that all of us are fallible, broken and in need of forgiveness. And if we can extend that to one another, that's another way in which we see we are neighbors to one another.
Yeah, a very distinguishing feature. We can be a really great academic environment, but unless we embody that kind of spirit, we're doing it for purposes other than the mission to which God has called us. David, thank you so much for taking time. Love your wisdom.
Yeah, great to be here.
Love your articulate way of describing and helping us to think through this passage. Thanks for taking time. I hope you'll read the document that is also attached to this video, and certainly if you have comments or questions that you want to pose to David, I'm sure that he'd be happy to read his email. God bless you, and may God use this passage to deepen your thinking and your own personal commitment in your walk with Christ.